The Vren Compact had a saying about first contact. The quiet ones are the ones to watch. It had been true for 400 years. Loud civilizations announced themselves, broadcasts, expansion patterns, the visible signatures of growth that any competent sensor network could track and assess. Quiet civilizations were different. They gave you less to work with, and less information meant more uncertainty. And uncertainty was where mistakes happened. Earth had been quiet for 200 years. Fleet Admiral Toresh had read the file twice before the mission. Modest territory, 11 systems. A military that on paper was unremarkable. Adequate ships, adequate weapons, nothing that stood out in any direction. His orders were simple. A resource survey had detected valuable mineral deposits in a system at the edge of human territory. A system that, according to every treaty on record, belonged to nobody. The Vren Compact intended to claim it. Standard procedure was to send a survey fleet, establish presence, and notify neighboring civilizations as a courtesy. He had not expected the notification to matter. He had been wrong. The response came within 6 hours of his fleet entering the system. Not a warning, not a demand. A simple transmission, polite in tone, from a vessel that had appeared at the system's edge without his sensors registering its approach, which was itself notable, because his sensors were good and approaching vessels did not simply appear. Fleet Admiral Toresh, this is Captain Rene Okafor of the Earth Survey vessel Meridian. We have an active research operation in this system. Been here for about 8 months, actually. I see you're setting up for mineral extraction. Before you commit resources, I wanted to give you some information that might save everyone some trouble. Toresh looked at the transmission for a moment. You have a presence here that was not in our survey data. We tend not to broadcast research operations, Okafor said. Habit, mostly. Anyway, the deposits you're looking at, we've been studying them. They're not what they appear to be. Explain. The mineral signatures that drew your survey fleet here are real, Okafor said. But they're surface readings. What's underneath is, well, it's easier if I just send you the data. Give me a moment, a data packet arrived. Toresh's science officer opened it and was quiet for a long moment. Sir, she said. This is extensive. How extensive? 8 months of geological surveys. Subsurface mapping, material composition analysis at depths our scanners couldn't reach from orbit. She paused. Sir, according to this, the deposits extend much deeper than our survey indicated, but the composition changes significantly below 200 meters. It becomes unstable. Extraction at the depths needed to access the valuable minerals would trigger. She stopped, reading further. Sir, this says extraction would trigger a cascading geological event, the kind that destabilizes the entire planetary crust in this region. Toresh looked at the data again. You're telling me, he said slowly, that the deposits we came here for are essentially a trap. Not a trap, Okafor said. Just a planet that looks like one thing from orbit and is another thing underneath. We found out the hard way, actually. Lost a survey drone 3 months ago. Took us a while to figure out why. Toresh had his science team verify the data independently. It took 2 days. The verification was thorough. They ran their own surface scans cross-referenced with the human data, sent down probes of their own to confirm the subsurface readings. The data was accurate. What concerned Toresh more than the data itself was what it implied. 8 months of survey work, detailed geological mapping, the kind of comprehensive subsurface analysis that required significant equipment and significant time, conducted quietly, in a system at the edge of human territory, by a single vessel that his fleet's approach had not detected until it chose to be detected. How many systems are you surveying like this? He asked Okafor during their third communication. Around here? Quite a few, Okafor said. We've been doing long-range geological surveys for a while now. It's not exciting work mostly. Mapping, cataloging, figuring out what's actually in places versus what the orbital scans suggest. She paused. You'd be surprised how often those two things don't match. Why does this matter to you? This system is not in human territory. It's not in anyone's territory, Okafor said. But it's near ours, and we'd rather know what's out here than not know. And, she paused slightly, if someone had started extraction without knowing what was underneath, the geological event wouldn't have stayed contained to this system. The instability would have propagated. We have a colony 2 systems over. We'd have felt it. Teresh sat with that for a moment. You are telling me, he said, that if we had proceeded with extraction, the consequences would have reached human territory. Eventually, yes, Okafor said, which is part of why I reached out. Mostly, I just didn't want anyone to get hurt over a mineral deposit that wasn't going to be extractable anyway. She paused. But yes, there's a self-interest component too. I try to be upfront about that. Teresh withdrew the survey fleet. He filed his report that evening. A report that, he knew, would generate questions. Withdrawing from an unclaimed system based on data provided by a civilization with no formal claim to it was unusual. It would need explaining. What he had not expected was the second transmission 3 days later, after his fleet had begun its return journey. Fleet Admiral Teresh, sorry to bother you again. I know you're heading home. I wanted to follow up on something. Okafor's tone was the same easy informality it had been throughout. We did some additional analysis after you left. The minerals you were after, they do exist, just not where the orbital scan suggested. There's a secondary deposit, about 40 kilometers from the primary site at a depth that's actually extractable. Composition's slightly different, but still valuable by your specifications, I think. I can send you the survey data if you're interested. Teresh looked at the transmission for a long moment. Why would you tell us this? Because you came here for minerals and the minerals are real, just in a different spot, Okafor said. Seemed like useful information. No charge. This system is not claimed by anyone, Teresh said slowly. If you have identified an extractable deposit, your civilization could claim it yourselves. We could, Okafor agreed. We're not really in the mining business, though, and like I said, we'd rather not have unstable extraction happening near our territory, and we'd rather not have anyone wasting resources on a deposit that isn't there. Giving you accurate data solves both problems for us. A pause. Also, honestly, it's just easier. You're here, you need minerals, we have the data. Seemed simpler to share it than not. Teresh's science officer, listening to the exchange, had a particular expression on her face. Sir, she said quietly, after the transmission ended, may I speak frankly? Go ahead. In 400 years of Vren Compact expansion, I am not aware of an instance where another civilization provided us with accurate resource data for a deposit they could have claimed themselves, with no request for compensation, no negotiation, and... She paused. Sir, she said no charge, as if the concept of charging had occurred to her, and she had dismissed it as unnecessary. Teresh thought about this. What do you make of it? He asked. His science officer was quiet for a moment. I don't know, sir, but I think it might be worth understanding. The secondary deposit was real. The data was accurate. Extraction proceeded without incident, and the minerals recovered were, as Okafor had indicated, valuable. Teresh's report on the incident generated significant interest within Vren Compact Strategic Command, not because of the minerals, but because of the pattern. A request was made for additional information on human civilization. Teresh, having more direct contact than most, was asked to facilitate. He contacted Okafor again 4 months later. Captain Okafor, I have been asked to gather information about your civilization's research activities. Specifically, the scope of these geological surveys you mentioned. Sure, Okafor said. What do you want to know? How many systems have you surveyed in this manner? There was a pause. Let me check, Okafor said. A moment later. As of the last quarterly report, just over 4,000 systems have some level of survey data. Geological mostly, but also atmospheric. Biological where relevant. That kind of thing. Teresh's science officer, present for the call, went very still. 4,000 systems, Teresh said. Give or take, Okafor said. It's an ongoing project. Been running for a while. How long? The current iteration's been running about 90 years, Okafor said. There was an earlier version that started before that. But the methodology was different, so we don't really count it the same way. 90 years, Teresh repeated. Yeah, it's one of those programs that just kind of keeps going. Nobody decided to stop it, so it kept being funded, so people kept doing the surveys. Okafor's tone was casual, as if describing something unremarkable. Most of the data just sits in archives. Occasionally it's useful, like with your situation. Mostly it's just, information. We like having it, and this data, Teresh said slowly. It is available to other civilizations? Sure, if anyone asks, Okafor said. Nobody really asks, though. I think most civilizations assume if we're not advertising it, it's classified or something. It's really just sitting there. A pause. You're the first person who's asked me about it directly, actually. I had to look up the exact number. Torish requested a formal meeting. It was granted by Okafor. It turned out was not difficult to reach, and seemed mildly pleased at the prospect of what she called an actual conversation instead of just emergency mineral updates. The meeting took place aboard a neutral station. Toresh brought his science officer and 2 senior strategic analysts. Okafor arrived alone with a data tablet in the same unhurried manner she had displayed in every prior communication. So, she said, settling into her seat. What can I help with? Toresh's lead analyst, a Vren named Sethka, who had spent 30 years in strategic assessment, opened the conversation. Captain Okafor, we have reviewed the incident in the disputed system and the subsequent information regarding your survey program. We would like to understand the scope and purpose of this program. Sure, Okafor said. What's the question specifically? 4,000 systems surveyed over 90 years, Sethka said. Geological, atmospheric, biological data, available to other civilizations on request but not actively shared. She paused. What is the strategic purpose of this program? Okafor thought about this for a moment. The way someone thinks about a question they haven't been asked before and want to answer accurately. I don't think there is one, she said. Strategic purpose, I mean. It started because, okay, this is going to sound less impressive than you're probably expecting. It started because some scientists wanted to know what was out there. Not for any particular reason. Just wanted to know, she paused. And then it kept going because the data turned out to be useful sometimes, like with your mineral thing. And because once you have 90 years of momentum on a research program, stopping it feels like a bigger decision than continuing it. So it just continues. Sethka looked at her for a long moment. You are describing a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation spanning 4,000 systems as having no strategic purpose. I mean, I guess you could call it intelligence gathering, Okafor said. But it's not really gathered with any target in mind. It's just general knowledge. About space. About what's in it. She paused. Look, I get why this seems significant from the outside. But honestly, from our side, it's kind of like, you know how some people keep detailed records of birds they've seen? Birdwatchers. It's like that, but for star systems. Nobody's using the bird records to plan anything. They just like knowing. 4,000 systems, Sethka repeated. 90 years adds up, Okafor said with a shrug. The meeting continued for several hours. Toresh's team asked increasingly specific questions, and Okafor answered them with the same unhurried directness, occasionally checking her tablet for specifics she didn't have memorized. What emerged, piece by piece, was a picture that Toresh's analysts found genuinely difficult to process. The survey program was not unique. It was one of dozens of long-running human research initiatives that had similar characteristics. Started for reasons that were, by Vren standards, almost absurdly modest, sustained for decades or centuries through accumulated institutional momentum, producing datasets and capabilities that dwarfed anything comparable in Vren Compact records, and largely unknown outside human territory because nobody had organized the information into something that announced itself. There was a long-running medical research consortium that had been cataloging biological samples from every world humans had visited for over a century. Originally started, Okafor explained, because someone wanted to compare how life worked on different planets, and it turned out to be useful for a lot of things later. There was a materials science archive that had been collecting samples and data on unusual substances encountered during exploration for nearly as long, which had apparently produced several manufacturing breakthroughs as side effects of research that had originally been conducted for unrelated reasons. There was the survey program itself, 4,000 systems, 90 years, casually offered to a fleet admiral as an afterthought during a conversation about minerals. How many of these programs are there? Sethka asked near the end of the meeting. Her voice had taken on a careful quality. I don't actually know, Okafor said. Nobody's ever really counted as far as I know. There's probably some kind of registry somewhere, but I've never looked for it because I've never needed to. She paused. Should I find out? I can ask around if it's important. It would be helpful. Sethka said. Okafor made a note on her tablet. I'll see what I can find. 3 weeks later, Okafor sent a follow-up transmission. So I asked around, she said. Turns out there's no central registry like I thought, but someone in the historical records office did a rough count a few years back for an unrelated reason. As of that count, and it's probably out of date now, there were approximately 11,000 active long-running research and survey programs across human territory and adjacent space. Long-running meaning operating continuously for at least 20 years. She paused. The person who did the count said it was probably an undercount, because a lot of smaller programs don't get formally tracked. They just kind of exist because someone's been doing them and nobody stopped. Teresh, listening to this transmission with his senior staff, was quiet for a long moment. 11,000, Sethka said finally. Approximately, Okafor said. Like I said, probably an undercount. And these programs, Teresh said. They produce in what? Data capabilities? What is the cumulative output of 11,000 programs running for decades each? I genuinely don't know, Okafor said. I don't think anyone's tried to add it up. It's not really the kind of thing that gets added up. It's more like each program produces what it produces. And sometimes that's useful for something. And sometimes it just sits in an archive being true but not useful to anyone yet. She paused. I think the honest answer is that nobody has a complete picture of it. There's just a lot of information spread across a lot of places, accumulated over a long time. Teresh's final report on the matter was the longest document he had filed in his career. It described the mineral incident, the survey program, the broader pattern of long-running research initiatives, and the 11,000 programs that nobody had counted until someone asked. The conclusion was not a strategic assessment in the traditional sense. Teresh found writing it that the traditional frameworks did not quite fit what he was trying to describe. The Vren Compact has spent 400 years building strategic advantage through directed effort, identifying objectives, allocating resources, achieving outcomes. This is an effective model and has served us well. It does not, however, prepare us for what we have encountered in human territory. Humanity does not appear to build strategic advantage in the way we understand the term. Instead, they appear to accumulate capability as a byproduct of simply continuing to do things they find interesting or useful for very long periods of time, without requiring ongoing justification for why those things should continue. A research program that began 90 years ago because some scientists were curious about star systems has produced a data set that exceeds anything in our strategic intelligence archives. Not because anyone intended it to, but because 90 years is a long time and curiosity, sustained, produces volume. I do not believe this represents a threat in the sense we typically assess threats. Captain Okafor's behavior throughout this incident was, by every indication, genuinely without strategic calculation. She shared information because sharing it was simpler than not sharing it, and seemed mildly surprised that anyone would find this notable. What concerns me, if concerns is the right word, and I'm not certain it is the scale of what appears to be sitting quietly in human archives, accumulated over decades and centuries by programs that nobody is tracking centrally, because tracking them was never the point. 11,000 programs, each potentially representing decades of accumulated data and capability, existing not as the result of strategy, but as the result of time and habit. We have spent 400 years asking what other civilizations are trying to achieve. I am not certain that is the right question for humanity. The more relevant question may be, what have they already accumulated simply by continuing for longer than most civilizations think to ask? I do not have an answer. I am not certain anyone does, including, I suspect, humanity itself. The report was read by Vren Compact Strategic Command with considerable attention. The response, when it came, was not what Teresh had expected. There was no directive to investigate further, no strategic countermeasure proposed, no urgent reassessment of human territory. Instead, 3 months later, Teresh received notice that the Vren Compact had formally requested access to human survey data for a system near Vren territory. Through proper channels, with a small data sharing offer of their own attached, the request was approved within a week. With a note from Okafor's office, glad to help. We've got survey data going back about 40 years for that region. Let us know if any of it's useful. Also, for what it's worth, if you've got similar long-running programs on your side, we'd be interested too. Always nice to compare notes with people who've been keeping track of things for a while. Torish. Read the note twice, then he forwarded it to Sethka with a single line of his own. I do not believe they are being strategic. I believe this is simply how they are. I am increasingly uncertain whether that is more or less significant than if it were strategy. Sethka's reply came an hour later. I think it is considerably more significant. Strategy has limits, it serves goals, and goals end. This does not appear to end. I do not know what to do with that information yet. But I think we should keep talking to them. Teresh agreed. He scheduled the next call for the following week.